6 white supremacists attacked Nat King Cole on stage in front of 4,000 people who did nothing. They kicked him, dragged him across the floor, tore his white jacket to shreds while cameras flashed. The police arrested them. Alabama released them on bail before sunrise. Case closed. Justice served. Except for one problem. 1,000 miles north, in a smoke-filled back room in Harlem, a man named Bumpy Johnson picked up a ringing telephone. And that was the worst thing that could have happened to those 6 men. Birmingham, Alabama. It was Thursday, the 10th of April, 1956, approximately 7 minutes past 9 in the evening. The municipal auditorium blazed with light from crystal chandeliers that cost more than most black families in Alabama earned in a decade. 4,000 white faces turned toward the stage like pale flowers following an impossible sun. And there, in the center of that blazing circle, Nat King Cole sat at a Steinway grand piano wearing a white dinner jacket that gleamed like fresh snow against his dark skin. If you want to find out how this incredible story ends, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you do not miss our next videos. Cole's fingers hovered above the ivory keys. He had just finished his rendition of Autumn Leaves, and the applause still echoed through the hall like distant thunder. Now he was about to begin Little Girl, a gentle ballad about innocence and love. Nothing political, nothing threatening, just music. He smiled, that famous smile, the smile that had made him the highest-paid black performer in American history, the smile that appeared on television screens across white America, the smile that said, "I am safe, I am acceptable, I am one of the good ones." He did not see Willis Carter rise from his seat in row 14. He did not see Kenneth Adams stand up 3 rows behind. He did not see Jesse Mabry, Orville Stevens, and the Taylor brothers beginning to move through the darkness of the auditorium, converging on the stage from 6 different directions like wolves circling prey. 6 members of the White Citizens Council of Birmingham. 6 men who had decided that tonight they would teach America a lesson about where black people belonged. Cole closed his eyes as his fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Little Girl floated into the air, delicate as soap bubbles. Willis Carter started running. The distance from row 14 to the orchestra pit was approximately 40 feet. Carter covered it in under 4 seconds, his dress shoes pounding against the carpeted aisle, his breath coming in sharp gasps, his face twisted with the kind of hatred that gets passed down through generations like a family curse. Behind him, 5 more men were moving. Cole heard the commotion before he saw it. The audience gasping, a woman screaming, the music faltering as musicians looked up from their sheet music with confusion in their eyes. He turned his head, and Willis Carter's body slammed into him with the force of a freight train. The microphone stand flew into the orchestra pit, crashing against music stands and scattering sheet music like frightened birds. Cole's back hit the curved edge of the piano with a crack that silenced the entire auditorium. His white jacket, that beautiful white jacket that had cost him 3 weeks of performance fees, tore with a sound like ripping paper. 11 seconds. That is how long it took for 5 more attackers to reach the stage. 11 seconds during which 4,000 people sat frozen in their velvet seats, watching 6 white men attack 1 black man under lights bright enough to film a motion picture. Kenneth Adams grabbed Cole's leg and pulled, trying to drag him across the polished wood of the stage. Jesse Mabry aimed a kick that caught the singer in the ribs, right beneath his heart. The Taylor brothers were screaming words that the newspapers would refuse to print, words that had been used to justify lynchings and burnings and horrors beyond counting. Flash, flash, flash. Camera bulbs exploded from the press section, freezing the violence in staccato bursts of light, creating photographs that would appear on the front pages of newspapers across America by morning, creating evidence that would haunt this nation for decades. No one moved to help. Not the 4 police officers stationed around the auditorium, not the stagehands in the wings, not the 4,000 citizens of Birmingham who had paid good money to hear this man sing. 11 seconds of absolute savagery, witnessed by thousands. Then finally the police pushed through. They pulled the attackers away one by one, dragging them backward while Willis Carter kept screaming, his face purple with exertion and hatred. Cole lay on the stage, staring up at the chandeliers spinning above him like frozen stars. His back screamed where it had struck the piano. His ribs throbbed where the kicks had landed. His jacket hung in tatters around his shoulders. And somewhere in those 4,000 faces, he knew, some were smiling. What happened next would have broken most men. Cole lay there for approximately 20 seconds, breathing hard, his body cataloging injuries that would take weeks to heal. Then he did something that the newspapers would call brave, but that Cole himself would never discuss. He got up. Nat King Cole, his dignity in shreds, his body battered, his white jacket destroyed, stood up on that stage in front of 4,000 white faces. A stagehand rushed out with a replacement jacket. Cole put it on with movements that were almost mechanical, his face revealing nothing. The conductor looked at him with a question in his eyes. Cole nodded. 15 minutes after 6, white supremacists had tried to destroy him. Nat King Cole finished his concert. He sang 4 more songs. His voice never wavered. His fingers found every note. The audience gave him a standing ovation, applauding until their palms were red, perhaps trying to cleanse themselves of those 11 seconds when they had done nothing. Cole left Birmingham that night and never returned. The 6 attackers were released on bail before sunrise. This was Alabama. They were white. Their victim was not. But 1,000 miles to the north, in a smoke-filled back room on 133rd Street in Harlem, a telephone was about to ring. And when the man they called Bumpy Johnson answered that phone and heard what had happened, those 6 men would learn something that the laws of Alabama would never teach them. Some debts cannot be settled in court. Some lessons can only be taught in the dark. The telephone rang at 34 minutes past midnight, and Bumpy Johnson knew before he answered that this call would cost someone everything. Harlem, New York, Friday, the 11th of April, 1956. The back room of Wells's bar smelled of cigar smoke, spilled bourbon, and the particular tension that always surrounded men who made their living after sunset. Bumpy sat behind a table covered with ledgers and receipts, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a glass of Hennessy at his elbow. He was 51 years old, and his name could silence entire city blocks. The phone kept ringing. Bumpy removed his glasses, folded them carefully, nodded to the man by the door. The man lifted the receiver and listened for exactly 4 seconds. Then his face changed. "Willie Moe, from Atlanta, says you need to hear this yourself." Bumpy did not hurry. He never hurried. He walked to the telephone with the unhurried gait of a man who understood that power meant never appearing anxious. "Willie, it's late." What he heard over the next 3 minutes would have made most men shout, curse, slam their fists against the wall. Bumpy Johnson did none of these things. He listened. His face remained perfectly still, a mask carved from dark stone. Only his eyes changed, the warmth draining out of them, replaced by something cold and patient and infinitely dangerous. His fingers tightened around the glass of Hennessy, tighter and tighter, until a crack appeared in the crystal. Willie Moe's voice painted the picture: the concert, the attack, the 11 seconds, the torn jacket, the kicks to the ribs, the 4,000 white faces watching and doing nothing, the 6 men walking away on bail while Nat King Cole held ice against his broken body in a train compartment heading north. When Willie finished, silence stretched across the long-distance line. "Names," Bumpy said finally. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, the gentleness of a blade sliding from its sheath. "I want names, addresses, places of employment, the bars where they drink, the churches where they pray. I want to know everything." This is why Bumpy Johnson was not just another gangster. He was something far more dangerous. He was a man who believed in consequences. By 3 a.m, he had everything. Willis Carter, auto mechanic, married with 2 children, drank at a bar called the Red Rooster. Kenneth Adams, insurance salesman, bachelor, lived alone on Maple Street. Jesse Mabry, steel mill worker, wife left him 6 months ago. Orville Stevens, night shift at the textile factory. The Taylor brothers, Ace and Mildred, ran their father's hardware store. 6 names, 6 addresses, 6 dead men who did not know they were dead yet. Saturday, the 12th of April, the basement of Rodney's funeral home on 145th Street. The irony of the location was lost on no one. 12 men sat in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. The room smelled of formaldehyde and floor wax. Bare bulbs cast harsh shadows on faces that had seen things most people only read about in newspapers. Former Marines who had stormed beaches in the Pacific, veterans who had liberated concentration camps in Europe, men who had learned their skills in the streets of Harlem under Bumpy Johnson's personal supervision. Bumpy stood before them in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most of them earned in 3 months. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. His tie was silk, the color of dried blood. He held 6 photographs. "These men believe they can attack our people without consequence," Bumpy said, his voice carrying easily despite its softness. "They believe Alabama will protect them. They believe their white skin makes them untouchable." He laid the photographs on an empty coffin that served as an improvised table. "They are wrong." One by one, he described the attackers. Carter, who jumped first. Adams, who kicked a man while he was down. Mabry, Stevens, the Taylor brothers. 6 ordinary men who had done an extraordinary evil and expected to face no reckoning. "4 of you will go south," Bumpy continued. "You will travel as salesmen. You will smile at gas station attendants and diner waitresses. You will attract no attention, and you will watch these men until you know their lives better than they know themselves." Raymond Delta, a man whose past was classified at levels that did not officially exist, spoke for the first time. And then Bumpy smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Then you bring them to me, all 6, alive. I want them conscious and healthy when they meet me. I want them to understand exactly what is happening and why." He gathered the photographs and squared them into a neat stack. "They leave Tuesday. Any questions?" There were none. There was only the work ahead. 2 unremarkable Ford sedans crossed the Alabama state line at 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, and nobody gave them a second glance. Tuesday, the 15th of April. Johnny Walker sat behind the wheel of the first car, his Marine-trained eyes scanning the road with the same alertness he had once used to spot German machine gun nests. Raymond Delta dozed beside him with the practiced ease of a man who could sleep anywhere and wake instantly at the first sign of trouble. 4 black men driving through Alabama in 1956. The wrong word, the wrong look, the wrong gas station could end in tragedy. At a Texaco station outside Montgomery, a police officer watched them fill their tank. He walked over slowly, his hand resting on his belt. "You boys lost?" Johnny smiled the smile he had practiced 100 times. "No, sir. Selling office supplies. Got appointments in Birmingham tomorrow." He reached into the car and pulled out a sample case, opened it to show fountain pens and ledger books arranged with professional precision. The officer looked at the case, looked at the suits, looked at the professional demeanor that seemed wrong somehow, that did not fit his understanding of how these people should behave. "Birmingham," he repeated. "Yes, sir. 3 days of meetings, then back to Atlanta." The officer stared for a long moment. Then he walked away without another word. Johnny finished pumping gas with steady hands. Only when they were back on the highway did he allow himself to exhale. By Thursday, they had found all 6 targets. Carter at the Red Rooster, drinking and boasting about his heroism. Adams at his church, praying to a God who apparently approved of beating black men on stage. The Taylor brothers at their hardware store, serving customers who congratulated them on their brave stand. A map of Birmingham in their motel room slowly covered itself with colored marks. Red for homes, blue for workplaces, green for favorite bars, yellow for the routes they walked, the cars they drove, the patterns of lives that would soon be interrupted. Friday night, Johnny placed his call to Bumpy from a phone booth. "We have everything. They do not suspect anything. They feel safe." Bumpy's voice came through cold and clear. "Sunday night, all 6. Bring them to the location." "Understood." Johnny hung up and watched the stars appear over Birmingham. Somewhere out there, 6 men were drinking beer and playing with their children and complaining about their jobs, living ordinary lives. They had no idea that judgment was coming. Sunday night arrived with the stillness of a held breath, and 6 ordinary lives were about to become extraordinary nightmares. The 20th of April, 1956, 11:43 in the evening. Willis Carter pushed open the door of the Red Rooster and stepped into the cool Alabama air, his blood warm with beer and his head full of glory. For 2 weeks now he had been a hero. His friends bought him drinks. Strangers shook his hand. The newspapers had printed his name alongside words like defender and patriot. He had shown that uppity singer his place. He had done what so many white men only talked about doing. Carter walked toward his Chevrolet, the only car left in the gravel parking lot. The broken taillight caught the glow of the bar's neon sign, flickering red, then dark, then red again. His keys jangled in his pocket. He never heard the footsteps. One moment he was reaching for his car door. The next, something covered his mouth and nose, something sweet and chemical, and the world tilted sideways like a capsizing ship. His keys hit the gravel with a soft clink. His body followed, caught by hands that lowered him gently, almost tenderly, to the ground. The parking lot remained empty. The neon sign continued to flicker. Inside the Red Rooster, Hank Williams sang about loneliness on the jukebox. 1 down, 5 remaining. 90 minutes later and 12 miles across town, Kenneth Adams woke to darkness and the smell of his own sweat. He had been dreaming about the attack on Cole, reliving it as he did every night, savoring the memory of his shoe connecting with the singer's ribs. In his dream, the crowd was cheering. In his dream, he was a champion. Then something pressed against his face, and the dream dissolved. Adams lived alone. There was no one to hear the brief struggle, no one to notice the back door that had been forced open with surgical precision, no one to see the shadows that carried his limp body through the backyard and into a waiting car. 2 down, 4 remaining. Jesse Mabry opened his front door at 17 minutes past 2 in the morning because someone was knocking. He had been expecting trouble. Angry letters had arrived all week. Someone had thrown a brick through his window, so when the knocking came, Mabry grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door and yanked it open, ready to swing. The doorway was empty. He frowned, stepped forward to look down the street, and felt a pinprick in his neck from behind. By the time he understood what was happening, his legs had already stopped working. 3 down, 3 remaining. The Taylor brothers learned about the disappearances Monday morning. 3 of their friends vanished without a trace, no ransom demands, no bodies, no explanations. They locked themselves in their house with their father's old shotgun and waited. At 3:45 Tuesday morning, glass shattered upstairs. Both brothers grabbed their weapons and charged up the stairs, ready to defend their home. They checked every room, the bathroom, the bedrooms, the small office where their father once did bookkeeping, all empty. A broken window in the hallway, cold night air streaming through the gap, but no intruder, no ladder outside, nothing. They looked at each other, confused and frightened, and turned to go back downstairs. The living room was no longer empty. 4 men stood between them and the front door. 4 men in dark clothes, their faces calm, their hands empty but somehow more threatening for their emptiness. The brothers raised their shotgun, but before either could speak, the world spun, and they found themselves on the floor, their weapons sliding across hardwood, their arms pinned in positions that promised pain. 5 down, 1 remaining. Orville Stevens left the textile factory at 4 in the morning, exhausted and thinking about nothing except his bed. The parking lot was nearly empty. His car sat under a burned-out streetlight, a pool of shadow in the pre-dawn darkness. He was halfway there when he noticed the figure standing beside his vehicle. Just standing, not moving, not speaking, just waiting. Stevens stopped, turned to run back toward the factory, toward lights, toward safety. Another figure blocked his path. 6 down, 0 remaining. By 5:30 in the morning, 2 unremarkable Ford sedans were driving north, away from Birmingham, away from Alabama, away from every law that might have protected the men who now lay bound and blindfolded in the back seats. The sun rose over cotton fields, painting the sky pink and gold, and 6 heroes of white supremacy began their journey toward something none of them could have imagined. Know what these men were thinking during those hours in the dark? They were thinking about rescue, about the police who must be searching, about the FBI who must be mobilizing, about the entire apparatus of white America that had always protected them, that had always caught them when they fell. They did not understand yet that they had fallen somewhere no one would look, somewhere beyond the reach of badges and courtrooms and the comfortable certainties of segregated justice. The abandoned cotton warehouse stood 53 miles northwest of Birmingham, surrounded by fields that had not been worked since 1941. The building loomed against the night sky like a forgotten monument, its wooden walls weathered gray by 15 years of Alabama weather. The roof sagged. The windows gaped like empty eye sockets. The only new thing was the chain on the main door, gleaming and recently oiled. Inside, 6 men lay on the concrete floor. Their blindfolds had been removed, replaced with cloth bags over their heads that allowed breathing but prevented sight. Their hands were bound behind their backs. Their legs were free, but none had tried to run. The 4 men who had brought them stood at the corners of the room, silent as shadows. Hours passed. Willis Carter was the first to break. "Do you know who we are?" His voice cracked between bravado and terror. "The whole state will be looking. The FBI will be looking. You're going to hang for this." Silence. "I'm talking to you. I'm a white man. You can't do this to a white man." "Nothing?" "Only breathing. Only the wind through gaps in the walls. Only 6 hearts pounding with the dawning realization that the rules they had lived by no longer applied. Kenneth Adams began to pray, fragments of psalms muffled through his hood. Jesse Mabry wept silently. The Taylor brothers sat back to back, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Orville Stevens had retreated somewhere inside himself, saying nothing, moving nothing. What happens to a man when everything that made him powerful is stripped away? When his uniform, his skin color, his laws all become meaningless? When he is reduced to nothing but a body on a concrete floor, waiting for something terrible? Willis Carter discovered the answer. The bravado drained out of him hour by hour, like water from a cracked vessel. By evening, he was no longer screaming threats. He was whimpering. They all were. At precisely 9 o'clock, the warehouse door opened. The sound of expensive shoes on concrete echoed through the space. Measured steps, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who owned time itself. More footsteps followed. Perhaps a dozen men spreading along the walls with military precision. Then a voice, calm, almost gentle, carrying the accent of Harlem streets and something else beneath, something cold and patient. "Good evening, gentlemen." The hoods came off. 6 pairs of eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, blinked against the sudden light of battery-powered lanterns. 6 faces, pale and stubbled and streaked with grime, turned toward the voice. Bumpy Johnson stood before them. His charcoal gray suit fit perfectly, without a wrinkle despite the journey from New York. His shoes gleamed in the lantern light, Italian leather polished to mirrors. A silk tie completed the ensemble. He looked like a man who had stepped from a Manhattan boardroom, not a man in an abandoned warehouse in rural Alabama. Behind him, 12 men lined the walls. Black men, strong men, men whose faces revealed nothing, but whose presence promised everything. Bumpy smiled. "My name is Ellsworth Johnson. Friends call me Bumpy." He paused. "You are not my friends. You are the men who attacked Nat King Cole. You are the men who thought you could put your hands on one of America's greatest artists and walk away." His smile faded. "You were wrong." Bumpy circled them slowly, his footsteps the only sound, his shadow stretching across the concrete like judgment made visible. He stopped before Carter and crouched, bringing their faces level. "You jumped first. That takes courage, the wrong kind. The kind that only exists when you believe the man you're attacking cannot fight back." Carter tried to look away, could not. "Look at me. Look at my skin. Do you see a man who is less than you? A man who should know his place? A man who deserves to be beaten while thousands watch?" Carter's lips trembled. A tear ran down his cheek. "I can't hear you." "No," Carter whispered. "No, sir." Bumpy stood, smoothed his jacket, adjusted his cuffs with precise movements. "Nat King Cole is a genius. His voice has brought joy to millions. He has achieved more than all of you combined will ever achieve. He created beauty. You created only ugliness." He moved to Kenneth Adams. "You kicked him while he was down, aimed for the ribs, wanted to make sure it hurt." Adams sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please." "Sorry." Bumpy tasted the word. "Are you sorry because you did it, or because you got caught? Because you hurt another human being, or because you're afraid of what happens next?" No answer, just shaking. One by one, Bumpy confronted them. Mabry, Stevens, the Taylor brothers. He made each one look into his eyes and see what they had done, not through violence, through something worse, forcing them to see themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time. The confrontation lasted over an hour. When finished, Bumpy returned to the center of the room and looked at his shoes, those beautiful Italian leather shoes that gleamed even in dim lantern light. Here is what happens now. Each of you will apologize to Mr. Cole, not to me, to him. You will look at my shoes because these shoes walk the same Harlem streets he walked, and you will say the words you should have said instead of raising your hands. You will mean them, and I will know if you don't." Willis Carter crawled forward on his knees, bound hands making balance difficult, face wet with tears and complete dissolution. He looked at those gleaming shoes. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. What I did was evil. Mr. Cole didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." The words came broken, barely coherent, but they came, and when Bumpy nodded, something shifted in Carter's face, something like the beginning of genuine shame. One by one the others followed, Adams with his face pressed to concrete, Mabry repeating himself desperately, Stevens in monotone, the Taylor brothers overlapping, finishing each other's sentences. When it finished, Bumpy stood silent for a long moment. "You will remember this night. You will remember these shoes. You will remember what it felt like to kneel before a black man and beg forgiveness." He turned to his men. "We're finished here." But they were not finished, because Bumpy Johnson believed in lessons that lasted, lessons that could not be forgotten or explained away, lessons that would stay with these men forever. What happened in the hours that followed would ensure they never forgot. No newspapers would report it, no courts would hear testimony, but 6 men would carry the memory in their bodies for the rest of their lives. When morning came, they were loaded back into cars and driven south. They were released on a dirt road outside Birmingham with instructions that were perfectly clear. Tell no one. Say it was an accident, a car crash, a fall, whatever story you prefer. But never mention Harlem. Never mention that warehouse. Never speak of what happened here. If you do, we will know, and we will return. The 6 men appeared on the streets of Birmingham on the morning of April 29th, 1956, 8 days after they had vanished without a trace. They came back different. Willis Carter was found sitting on a bench outside the Red Rooster at 6 in the morning, his hands wrapped in professional bandages, his eyes staring at something no one else could see. When the bartender recognized him and asked what happened, Carter spoke only 3 words. "Car accident. Don't ask." He never said anything else about those 8 days, not to the police who questioned him for hours, not to the reporters who offered money for his exclusive story, not to his wife who demanded answers through tears and threats, not to his children who kept asking why Daddy's hands looked different now. The police brought him in twice. They showed him photographs of known criminals. They asked about black men from the North. They promised protection if he would just tell them who had taken him. Carter stared at the wall and said nothing. Kenneth Adams returned to his house on Maple Street and did not emerge for 2 weeks. When he finally did, he had resigned from the White Citizens Council. He stopped attending their meetings. He stopped associating with anyone connected to the organization. He went to church more frequently than ever, but he sat in the back row now, and he never raised his hands during hymns. His neighbors whispered that something had broken inside him. They were not wrong. Jesse Mabry quit his job at the steel mill and moved to Florida 3 weeks after his return. He told his co-workers he needed a change of scenery, a fresh start, somewhere warm where he could forget Alabama winters. But his co-workers noticed that he flinched whenever a black man walked past. They noticed that he could not hold tools properly anymore. They noticed that he had aged 10 years in 8 days. He never came back, never wrote, never called, simply disappeared into the anonymity of a new life, running from something that could not be outrun. Orville Stevens was perhaps the most changed. The man who had stood on that stage as part of a mob, screaming slurs while cameras flashed, became something close to a ghost. He kept his job at the textile factory, but he spoke to no one. He answered questions with single words or silent nods. He worked his shifts and went home and sat in darkness until it was time to work again. His co-workers said something had happened to him, something that had broken him in ways that could not be repaired. When he passed away 12 years later of a heart attack, people said he had been dying slowly since that week in April. The Taylor brothers, inseparable since childhood, stopped speaking to each other 2 months after their return. Nobody knew exactly why. Perhaps they could not look at each other without remembering. Perhaps the bond they had shared, built on pride and certainty and the absolute conviction that they were superior, could not survive what they had experienced. Perhaps shame, real shame, is something that cannot be shared. Ace moved to Georgia in June. Mildred stayed in Birmingham but sold the family hardware store. They never reconciled. When their mother passed away 3 years later, they attended her funeral on different days. The Birmingham police investigated the disappearances with the intensity that white citizens of Alabama could expect. Detectives interviewed dozens of witnesses. They contacted the FBI. They developed theories about civil rights activists, ransom schemes, elaborate hoaxes. But when all 6 men returned, refusing to press charges, refusing to identify their captors, refusing to say anything about where they had been or what had happened, the investigation quietly died. The police had other cases. The newspapers found other stories. And the 6 heroes of white supremacy clearly did not want to be heroes anymore. In Harlem, Bumpy Johnson returned to his ordinary life as if nothing had happened. Numbers games, protection arrangements, political negotiations, the business of being the most powerful black man in New York City. He never spoke publicly about Alabama, never claimed credit, never acknowledged he had been out of town. But the story spread anyway, not through newspapers or official channels, through the whisper network that connected black communities across America like underground rivers. A story told in barber shops and church basements and kitchen tables from Harlem to Houston to Los Angeles. A story about 6 white men who thought they could attack Nat King Cole without consequences. A story about a man from Harlem who taught them otherwise. The details varied in each telling. Some versions were more violent than reality. Some were almost mythological, casting Bumpy as an angel of vengeance sent by God himself. But the core remained unchanged. There was a man who would not allow his people to be attacked with impunity. A man who could reach anywhere. A man who delivered consequences that no court would ever impose. This changed something in black America, not visibly, not in ways that white newspapers would report or white politicians would acknowledge, but in the quiet spaces where hope lived alongside fear. Something shifted. If Bumpy Johnson could reach 6 white men in Alabama, could make them disappear and return them broken, could operate beyond every law designed to keep black Americans powerless, then maybe the system was not as absolute as it seemed. Maybe there were cracks in the wall. Maybe there was power in places white America had never thought to look. Nat King Cole continued his career. He became even more successful, eventually hosting his own television show, the first black performer to do so. He shook hands with presidents. He performed for royalty. He proved that talent and grace could open doors that hatred tried to keep closed. He never spoke publicly about the Birmingham attack more than necessary. He never sought revenge. He never needed to, because someone had sought it for him. Cole passed away in 1965, taken by illness at the age of 45. Thousands attended his funeral. Millions mourned. His music lived on, his voice still bringing joy to generations who never knew about that night in Birmingham when 6 men tried to silence him. Bumpy Johnson passed away in 1968, collapsing on a Harlem street not far from the places where his legend had been born. The newspapers called him a gangster, a criminal, a lord of the underground economy. They were not wrong, but in the black communities he had protected, they called him something else. They called him necessary. They called him ours. The warehouse outside Birmingham was demolished in 1962. The cotton fields around it became suburban housing, neat rows of homes for families who would never know what had happened on that ground. No marker indicated the spot. No plaque commemorated the night when 6 men learned that their actions had consequences. But markers are not always made of bronze. Sometimes they are made of silence, of changed behavior, of lives that pivot on a single night and never pivot back. Willis Carter never attended another rally, never joined another organization, never spoke another slur in public. When the civil rights marches came through Birmingham in the early 60s, he watched from his window with an expression his wife could never read. Kenneth Adams found religion, real religion, the kind that demanded something of him rather than simply confirming what he already believed. He volunteered at a food bank that served anyone who was hungry, regardless of color. He never explained why. The Taylor brothers, estranged until death, left behind letters that their families found confusing, references to shoes and warehouses and lessons learned, references to a debt paid in full, references to things they could never speak aloud but could not stop remembering. And somewhere in the whispered histories of Black America, their story survives, not as tragedy, not as triumph, as something more complicated and more true, as evidence that power is not always where you expect it, that justice does not always wear robes and carry gavels, that sometimes, when the system fails and the law looks away and 4,000 people watch a man beaten and do nothing, there is still a reckoning. It comes in the night, wearing expensive shoes and a patient smile. It speaks softly and carries no weapon but certainty. It asks for apologies that have been too long delayed, and it leaves behind men who will never forget what they learned on a concrete floor in an abandoned warehouse, looking up at a figure who represented everything they had been taught to despise and discovering, too late, that they had been taught wrong. Nat King Cole's voice still plays on radio stations around the world. Unforgettable. Mona Lisa. The Christmas song. Songs that bring comfort and joy to millions who never knew the price that was paid for their creation. But those who know the full story hear something else in that velvet voice. They hear the sound of dignity that could not be destroyed. They hear the echo of justice that found its own path. They hear the whispered promise that Bumpy Johnson made good on, the promise that said simply, "Touch one of ours, and there will be consequences." The 6 men from Birmingham learned that lesson in the spring of 1956. The world is still learning it today.